outbound strategies to adapt, evolve, survive, and thrive. As I mentioned, we're represented across the value chain here. Very pleased that Michael Arnold could join us. He's the operations supervisor for North American vehicle logistics at Ford. Great to have you here, Michael. Also very pleased that Kevin Noer from Kansas City Southern could join. Obviously, it's a very interesting time for Kansas City Southern in multiple ways, but very important that we have the voice of the railroads on our panel as well, playing such a critical role. So thank you for joining us, Kevin. And certainly, last but certainly not least, from the carrier side, Mark Anderson, President and CEO of United Road, one of the most important carriers, of course, in the country, talking to us as well on the road side. So thanks as well to our distinguished panelists, and let's get into it. Mark, I would like to start with you. Giving our audience perhaps a bit of a sense of where we've lost carrier capacity. We talked about that this morning. I think Stephen said, well, where have it all gone, right? Clearly we've had issues with drivers, fleet capacity, and what's the perspective at United Road looking to the rest of 2022 and into 2023?
Yeah, so I think everyone knows, I think Sergio showed it was one of the top 4 concerns, right? Driver capacity, just based on the survey. The good news is in 22, it's the first year we've added net new capacity with drivers, company drivers, and that's really important to us. The bad news is over the last couple of years, the industry, the haul-away industry, we've lost about 30% of capacity. And I would say most of that capacity is gone for good. It's either out of trucking altogether, or they did go over to the freight side. And when you look at it from the perspective, while I tremendously respect all professional truck drivers, what we ask the car hauler to do is so much more. It's tough. It's very hard work. And when they do the assessment of the physical demands and the technology demands and some of those items, and they see the premium pay gap that they've enjoyed for years go away, and they can make just as much in general freight, and also some of the obstacles, whether it's not efficient yards, difficulty in parking their trucks so they can get the extra load or 2 a week, those type of things, it weighs on them every day. I think Sergio also said they want to drive, they want to move, they want to get there, load their cars and haul them and be on to their next stop. They have limited hours in which to do that. So when you're waiting to get 1 and 2 exception damages approved, it's taking away 30 to 60 minutes. And those are the things that we have to work to improve, is looking at the perspective of the car hauler. And certainly the first place we have to look at is in the mirror, right? The haul-away piece, we have to increase pay. We have to be more efficient. We have to be more collaborative within our group. But I'll tell you, we need help from the general supply chain, from our customers, from the rails and the ports, to make it efficient, where they can park, where they have clean and pleasant bathrooms to use, something that simple. It makes a difference every day because it's hard work.
It's a great point. I mean, just as a side note, I don't usually push people to other media besides automotive logistics, but actually the New York Times had a very important feature, exactly facilities for long-haul truck drivers, which we'll share some links. It's an important topic and perhaps certainly underlooked, I think, in our sector too. Before we get into more details, let's turn to the rail side. Again, giving a bit of a picture, we heard from Chris Stiles this morning that obviously, that there are some misalignments and service levels and capacities. But Kevin, perhaps you can give us a sort of overview of where you're seeing the issues right now on the rail side.
Yeah, it's a challenging time to say the least, but you've seen what has been highlighted already this morning, whether it be labor is probably the biggest challenge right now with the railroads, and having labor in the right places, right? It's not so much overall labor, still hiring like crazy, just like everybody else in this room, but then the fits and starts, when you've got those bubbles that we were referring to hitting the network and then disappearing, how do you plan appropriately for that to be ready, but not over ready and then not utilizing limited resources appropriately. So really labor is the biggest challenge hitting the railroads. It's been highlighted with the STB. It's been very public. We are now reporting several numbers on a weekly basis to the STV to make sure the visibility is there, right? We're not hiding anything, but making sure we're all on the right page of how do we improve that, whether really through hiring. And that hiring process, unfortunately, is a pretty lengthy situation. It's not, I hire today and you're in a seat in 30 days. It's about a 6-month process to hire somebody off the street with no rail experience, get them through the education, training, drug testing, and everything else. Then on the job training and actually in a locomotive is roughly a 6-month time period. So when you put that into consideration, you're sitting there saying, okay, well, we're into second quarter, we still need 300 more employees, now we're looking at Q4. So just like the OEMs and the production that we've been talking about, the hiring and labor issue is going to be somewhat in line, right? Getting better throughout the year, but it's not going to be tomorrow or even Q3, but the rest of the year and probably going into next year.
So interesting there again that the perhaps somewhat less of the physical capacity, but the labor is really where the constraint is. And just like semiconductors take a long time to ramp up, so does hiring. Michael, if I'm giving the OEM perspective from Ford, clearly we've just heard from our co-panelists here. Where are you feeling at Ford the issues right now, and what do you see as most critical, again, looking to next year?
Sure, yeah, I think we've kind of touched a little bit, right? Ultimately, the customer is impacted the most right now with both kind of issues that we just highlighted with the labors, the longer lead times, right? The consumer managing the expectations is certainly a big priority for us right now, right? You know, a vehicle that may take, maybe took 10 days to get to a dealer from a production plant may take 15 now, right? So making sure those expectations are out there to adjust for some of the realities that we're seeing on the rail and car haul side. I would say both are equally as important at this point. I think the rail has some unique challenges, the longer lead times that we're seeing, some of the labor shortages where it's causing the bubbles where, you may not have any product at any rail ramp for 5 days, and then we could maybe receive 500 or 600% of what we would normally get, right? So it's causing some variation then, levels for the drivers as well, the ups and downs. Thankfully, I think with the volume that we see in the network, some of that ups and downs have gone away that we're seeing. It's more consistent volume across some of the destination ramps, which I think help provide some stability for the drivers in general with the work. First, back in March, we had a record low inventory across the network, right? And we didn't have any work for drivers at some locations, which just seems unfathomable to think about now 2 months later again. So I think we're starting to see the volume is there, volume's high, at least it's consistent. It's one thing that we can provide is some stability right now to our partners.
And I think that is a key point. We talked again this morning about the difficulty in planning, the last minute requests and push, and that obviously, makes it, flexibility is hard in this sector, although we definitely need some more of that. Are there other capacity risks that you see when you look across your network? I mean, here we're talking road and rail, but do you see a wider picture where you would address?
I would say not necessarily maybe directly related with our car and rail partners. We've talked about lead times for parts and new trailers, right? I think that's having an impact both for car haul and rail, right? Getting new equipment into our equipment's aging, right? So we need to rotate that equipment out. We're talking with terminals now that are waiting on new trucks that have been waiting for over a year, right? So I think that's another challenge, maybe not directly related to the day-to-day, but we're seeing delays there as well that could have a larger effect, right? If we can't ramp up the demand and meet the timeline, we can't have someone waiting over a year for a trailer, as an example.
Before we go, and I think we'll talk more on the labor side, but just if I might turn first to the fleet capacity, Mark. Is United Road investing or looking to invest in the coming years, or do you see, again, it's more about using what you have as a volume with the volume picture currently?
Right. So I'm going to tie capacity into it because it's one of those issues where it's a driver satisfier to drive a newer truck that looks good, has the latest technology onto it. So we're definitely going to invest. We haven't invested as much as we normally do the last couple of years because they haven't been available, and we've had idled equipment. So we're definitely going to look to invest and get back up to the numbers we have been previously. But again, there's waiting times, right? And we've been really, I'll say, persistent in trying to have a fleet of all one type of chassis, and that's at risk because our main supplier, right, it's pushing out, as all of them are. So, you know, that gives different challenges too with inventory parts and mechanics being trained to work on them and things along those lines. But even if for the trucks that we've ordered today, the lead time, by the time we mostly use Cottrell, by the time they're out through Cottrell, we get the truck, they go to Cottrell, et cetera. I mean, it's months, it's not weeks, right? And that'll take some time, but I think you'll see all of the haul-away companies invest, for sure.
I think that's Cottrell calling about the alternative that you mentioned it. But and just to kind of on that lead time point, is the lead time also a challenge from the truck itself, from the truck manufacturers?
Absolutely, that's the biggest.
Right.
That's the biggest delay.
Right.
For sure, is getting those, and we keep getting orders pushed back.
Yeah, yeah. Kevin, you know, on the rail, it's always a highly capital-intensive business across the network and infrastructure. With even perhaps at the moment, without even talking about the CP merger, you know, would you look at particular network investments that you're making to support automotive?
Yeah, really good question. So in July of 2020, we received a presidential permit to build a second bridge connecting the U.S. and Mexico, which is a significant feat in itself, getting that permit to start with, then getting two countries to agree on that infrastructure is another feat, and now getting the permitting process and getting that into place. So it's a roughly $120 to $150 million investment, and why that's significant. Today, when you interchange a train to and from Mexico, it's one train at a time. So one train goes, you wait, another train goes, you wait. So your capacity is roughly 30 trains a day is what you're sitting at. At roughly 10,000 trains a year, that's a pretty significant number. Having that second bridge automatically makes that a two-way street, right? So now you can run trains in both directions, which makes you more fluid. And if there is any kind of incident on one bridge, you can now cross over and continue to be fluid instead of locking up that network. And the bridge and that border crossing is by far the biggest bottleneck within the network itself, running at 3 miles per hour. Sounds crazy to move at 3 miles per hour over.
I don't think
that.
that's running. I think that's the
Yeah, I was gonna say most of us could run that fast. It's a very slow walk, and there's also a process improvement that goes along with that. Today, a crew interchanges, so a train goes to the middle of the bridge, and a Mexico crew walks back, and a U.S. crew walks on, gets on the locomotive, and that train keeps moving. So processes on top of infrastructure will make that a much more fluid part of the network, and now we're running through U.S. and Mexico instead of stopping and starting at the U.S. and Mexico.
What's the timeline on that kind of?
The expectation is completed by the end of next year.
Okay.
So
okay.
it's an amazing, permitting takes 8 to 12 months. That's the biggest time laggard. And then once it's approved, they start construction and hope to have it done by the end of next year.
Yeah. Okay. So clearly that's a major infrastructure point, which will help alleviate in other areas. And in terms of your sort of yards and switch points and stuff, is there also changes in the network there?
Yeah, really good question. So absolutely, current infrastructure and new infrastructure within sidings where trains can go off to the side, so trains continue to move fluidly, has been probably the biggest focus point with longer trains and just the current situation. There's been a lot of heightened focus on how do we keep trains running more fluid, and really yard capacity is the biggest one. The faster you can process those trains or get out of the way so you can continue to run fluid is the best way to have a fluid network consistently.
Okay, so there is positives to point to here from infrastructure investment, obviously fleet investment with timelines we know we have to manage. But let's come back to some of those labor and driver points. Mark, you talked about some of the things that United Road has had to do around wages, for example, and obviously what the industry needs to think about in terms of just rest stops. What else from the vehicle logistics industry, what else can we be doing?
Yeah.
Again, when we talk about the community, as I mentioned this morning, it's all here. Like, what should we be reflecting on?
Yeah, I still I want to make sure I emphasize that it's always incumbent upon us, our own companies, to really be responsible and push technology and efficiency and treat our professional car haulers the right way. So that's permission to play in this business, and I think we do a great job, and I think our peers do a wonderful job as well. We are at the end of the supply chain, right? So all the inefficiencies that are inherent to any supply chain, we have to deal with. And it can be tough, whether it's rail bunching or ship bunching, it becomes difficult. So if there are ways, you know, you always hear the word collaboration, but when you're in a world of every unit is sold, we have to think of how can I make the most of the car hauler's time? And instead of trying to get that unit that important dealer needs to give to his customer, how do I make it where I am taking 4 or 5 cars to that dealer? If we can load and unload dealers or vehicles according to dealers, that's just a simple efficiency that we have the technology to do. We know who's bought them. We know where it's going. Those type of things will help. A driver, again, does not want 4 stops. They do not want to unload and reload cars. The way they make money is driving. So if we can have more 1 and 2 stop loads, they make more money. It's not always just about rate, that we need more rate, we need more rate. It's about efficiency. And if we're going to have to figure out, we've lost 30% of capacity, I mentioned, we're going to have an increase in SAR of 20%, that gap is not going to be filled with more bodies. It just isn't. So we have to fill it with technology and collaboration. And again, on our side, we can collaborate more amongst the hauling companies too, whether it's sharing loads or sharing shuttle vans, and you see more and more of that happening amongst us. We need to continue to do more, but again, the Geobased initiatives with the railroads, we need more progress, and it needs to happen faster. If we can get cars valeted in the load line, if a driver is not waiting 2 hours to get approval on a 1 or 2 exception. We used to have complaints about misbayed units or fuel runouts. Those are exceptions. It's part of dealing with it. I would say that's not a problem. It's really more about just the daily struggles that the car hauler has to go through that can be completely eliminated. Parking's another example, and that's not just a cost. If we can park on site, that allows us to preload for the next day. That will give us 2 more loads for the week. And if you take 2 loads by the number of car haulers out there, that's a lot of cars, right? That's thousands of cars. But when you're parking off site and it's not in a safe area and you have vehicles damaged or stolen, you know, you're not going to have the truck loaded. You're going to avoid that efficiency that you could take advantage of.
It's important points and concrete solutions offered there as well. Michael, I mean, when you look at these drivers who in some ways are also Ford drivers, clearly when they're also carrying your products, the sort of initiatives that Mark just talked about, are these areas that you're working closely with your providers on now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ford and all of the OEMs, right, we need to, now is our chance, right? When volume's still down, like Mark alluded to, right, now is our chance to work out some of these inefficiencies. And you know, if we can geobay across the network, if we can have the vehicle staged, you know, to some degree for the dealers, not every load maybe, but if we can reduce that time in the yard maybe by 30 minutes, you know, that has a compounding effect that just creates capacity with for the drivers that we do have left in the industry. So, you know, we're working on multiple pilots across the country on a lot of these ideas. Largely it's come back from the car haul community through a task force that was formed through ALEC, right? That, you know, we want to work with others. We want to work with other OEMs. We want to work with the railroads, right? But it's going to take all of us working together to initiate some of these. Like the parking, like Mark alluded to, I think that's just a no-brainer. I mean, why wouldn't we do that as an industry to allow our drivers to be more efficient? And there is, you know, other areas of improvement too, right? We talked about some of the rail bunching, but at the end of the day, right, we're going to need to rely on these car haulers to keep our network moving, right? If we jam up our rail heads, right, we're all in trouble. We're all going to suffer from that. So focusing, you know, first there and working our way backwards, I always think there's opportunity. One challenge that we have to the car haulers as well is, right, is how do the car haulers collaborate more on the load building and load sharing? I know that's a touchy subject at times, right, but that's certainly another area of opportunity, right? Every time we see a truck, every time I see a truck empty going down the road, right, that's, in my view, that's missed opportunity, right? It's missed capacity. So how do we minimize that? How does Ford and, how do we support? I think we're arms wide open to ideas on how, do we need to engage with, these partners here and this, and maybe it's not, can't work everywhere across the country, I understand that, but where else can we work together? We'd be interested in that and of course support that.
It is an expensive way to transport air. It doesn't help anybody, I think.
No.
So important initiatives there, Geobased pilots, as you alluded to, so we'll be very interested to follow up and hear more about how this is progressing. Kevin, maybe staying actually with the ideas, some of Mark's ideas, because it's also kind of how the railroads can work with carriers, in the yards, the bays. Is this something now more on the radar within Kansas City Southern? Are you open more to working directly with Mark and his peers to improve those situations?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Michael talked about ALEC and Impact, two industries, railroads, OEMs, collaborate. The list of initiatives is longer than I've seen it since I started in auto 8 years ago, right? And we're talking about geobaying. How do we get the trucks on and off the terminal as fast, safe, and as fast as possible? 'Cause that frees up capacity. And there may be bunching at times, but even in a fluid network, when that may be less, you still have to keep that fluid no matter what the volume is. So that's probably the biggest, is really geobaying per terminal and making sure that that's defined across the industry. Everybody has a little different interpretation of what geobaying really means. Right. So that's a challenge. We're also working at origin, right? So as you're loading at the plant, and I think Steve mentioned it, coming off the plant and being able to produce for specific destinations together, and then loading those rail cars for those specific dealers to even that granular of a level where one bi-level with 8 vehicles are all going to dealer A at destination. That makes it easier for the destination terminal to unload and load line straight away instead of 1, 2, 3, 6, 4. You're making that more efficient. So right, anytime you make that process more efficient, especially in a labor-constrained market, you're going to be better. So that's really a hand in hand, and we're going to continue to do that.
Mark, again, is there some great initiatives there? Are there other pleas you would make to the railroad specifically where you see opportunities that we're missing?
Yeah, I know the railroad, they have an asset, the space, right? And they have to maximize the return on that asset, just like we have to do with our trucks and every other company has to do. But I do think one way to look at maximizing the return on that asset is the velocity and the turnover of those vehicles, right? And so it's not just about using it to park a car, it's also about turning that car over, right? And if we can look at that as part of getting the return to maybe allow truck parking and some of those items, it might be helpful. The other thing I would say is we need more complete participation from haulaway. So I'm going to raise my hand first, right? And from OEMs, Mike has been involved, as well as Chris Beavers from GM, and it's appreciated. And from rail, to everyone's got to come to the table, right? It can't just be 2 or 3 from each segment. And I think that will expedite things, because we make some progress. To your point about geobaying, we make some progress and then it gets in front of someone else and it's, well, that's not the way we do it, or I want to do this, or things along those lines. The other item I would offer is, we've all talked about EPOD for years. It was in place before I even got into this industry, but there's still paper. There's paper all over the place. So our drivers are getting paper, and then they have to turn it in at the gate, and again, driver dissatisfier, waste of time. Damages aren't recorded electronically then, so then you're backtracking to those type of things. And there's been a bigger push of everyone getting their own app, and we don't want our professional car haulers having 10 apps from different OEMs or dealers or rail yards. We want them to have one app, and in our case, I want it to be our app, and I'm sure the other haulaway companies want it to be their app. And we can do background with our IT groups on how we can exchange all the information, because we're all collecting the same stuff. But let's not put it on the person on the front line to make those decisions, because they're going to make mistakes. They have enough to do. So let's have the back office handle all of that. And they can just have whatever one app that individual uses, let technology work in the background and not make those demands on the car hauler.
In some ways, it's obvious, but the issues that we often talk about in this industry, where there's inefficiencies, whether it's not digitalizing opportunities where we should, whether it's not working together, how actually they're directly impacting the driver, that they are directly pushing drivers out of the industry because it's costing them time and money too, not just in effect.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like a whiner here, but it is pushing them out of the industry, right? If they're not going to make that premium, which I know they can make that premium back by getting these efficiencies because they can haul more cars and they'll get paid more. So we can get that back to them, but it's just dealing away with these things that really are providing no value. The data provides value, but we can get the data a different way. And looking at those driver satisfiers, it makes a huge difference.
Michael, do you see from the data side? I mean, clearly as Mark said, the carriers have to collect it from various different points. Is that something Ford is actively trying to help with standardized protocols and try to communicate in these sorts of ways, so that, because there's so many technology opportunities out there, and to Mark's point, the back end does need to find a way to pull this together.
Yeah, I mean, I think to ask a driver to use 2 or 3 different apps, right, for one vehicle, and mind you, if he has 6 or 7 vehicles, right, he has to use that's 3 or 4 different apps, 2 or 3 different apps, whatever it may be, for each of those vehicles to take pictures is, complete inefficiency. I 100% agree with Mark that, I think it's all good intentions. I think we can connect the systems together, but I think it goes back to the data standardization that we kind of already alluded to, right? We need to be aligned on the systems that are available, standardizing those milestones. So it's companies like United Road and others, right? It's one data set, right? They're not trying to then work with 14 different OEMs, 12 different OEMs, especially some of the new companies coming into the space as well, right? They may have different data requirements. We really need to standardize around what that looks like, and we need to standardize it. It doesn't matter what kind of system you use, just let them talk to each other. Right at the end of the day, let them connect to increase the efficiency of that driver coming out of that yard.
And Kevin, I mean, obviously the railroads would face very much similar issue from data points, different standards. I think Kansas City Southern have you been working on digitalizing systems and trying to remove paper, simplify these processes? I can imagine there's a fair amount of paper involved in the rail industry as well.
Always, right? Unfortunately, too much paper at times. So KCS is a little bit more unique, right? We're a very heavy originator of traffic, not a whole lot of destination traffic. We serve 17 plants in Mexico, right? So that's really our business. But how do we make that process more efficient electronically? And there's a lot going on, Mexico specific, and some of the regulatory changes that's pushing that ahead. But you look at that process, we're more, I would say, customs based is where we see a lot of the inefficiencies of tremendous amount of paper to do something that's a pure electronic interchange in Canada, right? Canada border really is a seamless border that's not even really existent, more or less, where Mexico is a physical border. So from the KCS perspective, that's where we see a lot of the opportunity in eliminating paper efficiencies and taking those exceptions out because you can use data appropriately.
And again, really clear solutions that we can see. I do want to give the audience opportunities. Sorry, I'm slightly blinded by the light, but I might rely on my colleagues to if you see a hand, make sure that we get a mic there to it and address it.
I will just add a little bit to that, just from a data perspective too. From an OEM perspective, we're largely flying. We don't know what kind of inventory that a lot of these railheads have.
Yeah.
Right. So if we have a large release for, let's just say, the Portland area as an example, right? We don't have any guidance to say, hey, that this area is already at 500% of capacity. Right, so I do think there needs to be some more collaboration among the OEMs, of course, but also some more visibility into, what kind of inventory, where we're surging at different parts of the country from the railroads. I would say that ability is limited. We're not really sure, we don't understand why, right? We're all here together, we all have the same common goal here at the end of the day. So and I think that will also help on some of the car haul constraints that we may have too, right? More coordination, allow the OEMs to work with our car haulers to divert more assets there. As an example, we're going to see a surge here, right? I think there needs to be more of that, especially when industry volume picks back up. If we get back to those SAR numbers, as presented earlier, right? That's going to be even more. It's going to be even more imperative that we have that mindset and that approach, but not everywhere around the country, of course. I think it's only in select areas. Yeah. Some of our larger markets where we share a lot of the same volume. A lot of our dealers are clustered to begin with, together. But I would say that's certainly something that we need to work on as an industry as well.
Kevin, do you recognize that? Is that partly the result of OEMs sort of coming in at the same times, or not necessarily being clear about what their volumes are, which makes it harder perhaps for the rail to make that visible to other OEMs, for example?
Yeah, I can't speak for the other railroads. Again, we don't have some of the same challenges that Michael's referring to, but yeah, it's just how do you work together but within the right structure to not put yourself at risk for certain challenges, right? But yeah, that collaboration, I think through the pandemic, a great example is the railroads and OEMs used to get together like once a month or bi-monthly. We went to weekly calls where everybody was participating and really giving a lot more information than anybody had ever felt comfortable sharing, and that's continued, and now it's a bi-weekly conversation with all participants, and this is what we're seeing. This is production expectations. This is what's going on in the network, specific pockets for every railroad, equipment availability, cycle times, and what they're doing and why they're doing what they are, improving and the loaded side and empty and everything else. So you're seeing a lot more open communication instead of your, say, prototypical kind of politically correct conversation that didn't go very far. So really, at that side, the collaboration and open communication's gone a long way since we started 2 years ago.
Yeah, if I could add, you talked about not having visibility at certain railroads or when there's a lot of inventories at certain points in time. I think if you look at the supply chain, right, surges are what really cause the problem. We need to keep our trucks rolling. I think processors need to keep their employees processing, right? So if there's a way to meter that inventory, similar to a plant, right? When you get the cars produced, you'll have overtime shifts, then you can adjust accordingly. And I don't know the answer necessarily to how to do that. I know it would require space to store cars, but again, if there's a way where you can go process things to a certain geography or a dealer group or a zone or however it's organized, and that way it's delivered in that same manner, there's just efficiencies all the way down the line. Because even when we get a notice from a customer that says, hey, inventory is going to be heavy in a week, it's okay, right? I mean, thank you, we appreciate it, and we'll try and steer other capacity that way, but generally what happens is you're either robbing Peter to pay Paul, or you're deadheading because a week gives you some time to find some inventory to get you down there, but generally it causes an inefficiency in that supply chain. At least it does on the haul-away side, and I would think on the processing side it would as well. Same with the rail unloading side, right? 100%. You have to surge that up and down, and so surges give us problem, and I think timing of unloads give us some problems too. So when things are unloaded on a Friday and we have commitments to our customers with certain delivery parameters, and we don't have dealer availability, although that's improved. I think all the OEMs have done a great job improving that STI capability at dealers. But when you get something on a Friday, it's really tough to deliver at day zero, especially when it comes to you at noon, or if it's on a Thursday and it gets to you at noon. I mean, the loads are generally built ahead of time. So if you get something Thursday in the afternoon, chances are it's not going to be delivered until Monday or Tuesday. And, count the days, right? That's a lot. Even the business days, you're already at 3 days. So that can be difficult too on how can we get those unloads and those transmissions as early as possible in the day and in the week.
Michael, something that came up this morning, and I know we're going to be talking quite a bit about at the rest of the event as well, is ETA accuracy and providing updates in a more dynamic way, whether that's across the supply chain and in fact right through to dealers and customers. Is this something that's come into sharper focus at Ford as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly echo the increase in demand for information, the location of the vehicle. When will I get my car, right, is kind of what we joke about. But yeah, we certainly feel the pressure from our customers as well. I think that's going to drive some behavior. We're starting to see an increase in pickup of dealer pickups at some of our destination ramps and some of our plants. Right, customers are, now that they have some visibility onto where that vehicle is at, more than they've had in the past. I still think we have a ways to go with providing that visibility to the customer, and I think we'll eventually all going to have to share it. I think that's what the industry is going to eventually demand, or I should say our customer. But yes, we've had an intense focus on ETA accuracy, providing an ETA to that customer, and then of course revising that ETA, if the vehicle goes off plan or if we're going to run into a delay. So a lot of focus in on, with the delays, how do we update our ETA? How do we update our ETA metrics and our forecast, and trying to minimize maybe the number of ETAs that we give to that customer, right? If you revise an ETA maybe 6 or 7 times, right, and they get an email 6 or 7 times, well, that may be a dissatisfier. Some may not care, right? And we know we've ran on the back end where it could arrive too early, right? Maybe it shipped a little faster than we were anticipating, and some customers weren't ready from a financing perspective. I mean, we've gone through all scenarios. So but yeah, certainly an increased focus for us, and I think the customer is going to do more to get their vehicle, and we got to be ready for that in one way or another.
Absolutely, and if we go far enough with sharing that visibility, you might have more customers planning weekends in Portland to pick things up from rail yards. Again, something we're going to be talking about in many other panels as well. But Kevin, I did want to turn as well to the merger, just to talk a bit about that. I mean, I know it's still going through regulatory sides, and I think that probably doesn't clear maybe until early next year. But can you just give us a sense of what this combination with CP and the single track railroad first in North America, what will that concretely mean for the automotive industry, and even related to our discussion here?
Yeah, absolutely. So exciting times, to say the least. It's been a heck of an adventure to get to this point, but we are right in the midst of the heart of it. Like you mentioned, should be completed early next year. Right now, that's what they're projecting. Really, the benefit of it is one company, one railroad, one vendor to go from Mexico to Canada, right? You're crossing 2 borders, 3 countries, and I think Sergio had it best talking about the complexity of aligning a carrier or vendor to try to get that process from A to B, and when you're working with multiple vendors, more complexity comes with it. Take that complexity out, it's one person that you're interacting with, one company, one system, one payment system, one claim system, right? So all of that becomes consolidated into one proposal, right? One comprehensive opportunity. So that by far is the biggest opportunity. And then once you're looking at that and how that aligns with the automotive industry specifically, is tremendous opportunity to make it a more seamless process, give visibility on ETAs, exactly where that rail car is, and then also just the overall service offering that provides is monumental.
I wanted to, we have a couple of minutes left. Mark, when we look, starting with you, Mark, here, clearly we know costs are rising, and this is putting plenty of pressure on carriers, on the industry in general. At the same time, not to get too delicate about it, there's higher profits coming on the OEM side, there's more money coming into the system. I mean, is there more the industry needs to do to sort of share the pain and the gain, so to speak, in looking at this network?
I didn't hear the beginning of any antitrust guidance, and we may be approaching that. So, the way our profitability works on our end from a haulaway perspective is efficient volumes, right? Is making sure we're not moving air. And so when you have disruptions in different parts, it makes it difficult, right? Demand is there to buy cars, and I want SAR to go from 14 to 16 to 20. We should all want that in this room, even though it's going to cause us headaches and problems. We should all do that, but those higher costs, they go away when you drive efficiency. You know, I can't control the price of fuel. I think we've seen changes in various fuel surcharge programs to address that, but there's not one fuel surcharge program out there that is keeping up with the cost of fuel. Not one. They've all been adjusted, and we're appreciative of all those adjustments. But when the price of diesel goes up 50 cents over a weekend, there's nothing you can do with that. And then when you have inefficiency to back that up, that makes the problem. And there's several other examples where it's out of our control, whether trucks are at a dealership for an average, it used to be 2 days, and now it's an average of 6 days. So how do we can control that, right? We can't, unless we're more efficient with the trucks that we have on the road. So that's what I keep trying to go back to, is making sure we take the waste out of the system, dealing with the problems, take away those problems the car hauler has to do, and then we, being the haulaway side, we have to deal with those rising costs, and we have to determine what percentage we pay our car hauler and things like that. Those are the things that every business in America has to do with, whether it's a pizza place or anyone else. And we're capable of doing that, and we're happy to do that, but we need the waste out.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a great point. And I think even if there was a fuel surcharge that was instantaneous, it couldn't recover the inefficiency, right? Once you've paid for that, that's
right?
out. Yeah.
That hurts. And so as these have been adjusted earlier, where they've gone from quarterly to monthly or weekly or whatever it may be by different OEM, okay, well, eventually fuel will go down. It's hard to imagine, but eventually it will. So when it does start going down, we have to make sure, because we took the pain of the quick rise, we have to make sure we enjoy the benefits of that quick decline, and that's when we have to move back to those longer periods of time of adjustment. We can't take the pain on both sides of it. Yeah. Those things, I would just say, that's about fundamental fairness.
Yeah, yeah. Michael, is that your main focus for this too, to address where costs are rising and to really focus in on that network optimization and efficiency?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Other than the compensation with the driver, which we know other players outside of our industry are driving the rates up. Through with the box trucks, we've already kind of alluded to. Mm-hmm. I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think now is the time to try to get some of these efficiencies before the SAR volume goes back up.
Yeah. So we're coming close to time here, and obviously, intentionally, we were definitely speaking about these capacity issues that we're facing. But looking a little bit further beyond too, in the not so distant future, Ford, for example, is investing heavily in new factories and electrification, obviously new locations. We talked this morning about changes in weights and the impacts that will have in vehicle logistics. Just from your point of view, Michael, are there things that you do want or starting to do to work with your providers to look ahead and prepare for some of these network changes and indeed product changes which are coming?
Yeah, a great question. I think it's a challenge that we're all going to face here on the horizon. I think there's one thing that we can do as an industry, right, is push the weight increase in Washington, D.C. We got the extension, which was great in terms of the length, but I think to combat some of the increases that we're going to see in EV vehicles, we need that weight extension. And we've been lobbying it for many years now, and I don't think we can let off the gas, pun intended, but let off the pedal and the speed on trying to push that through before our network flips, right? We reach that point where maybe 40-50% of our network is now EV vehicles. So, and I think trying to maybe minimize maybe the number of miles a truck is traveling, right? To Mark's point, right? We need to find the efficiencies where that truck driver maybe is home each night, right? That's another emerging trend that we're seeing. And making sure that those vehicles, the EV markets, what we're seeing is largely more popular in more popular in denser population areas around the country, select markets. It's not everywhere. So that's helping us a little bit with our planning of where these orders are going. So we can certainly see that, and we're planning around that. But how do we maybe make sure that that truck, that driver can build only 1 or 2 stops, or they're maybe going 150 miles round trip, as an example. We have over 4,000 locations we need to deliver to. So we have a different set of challenges maybe than some other OEMs when it comes to distributing EV vehicles and building out the number of vehicles required on a load to get to then those number of dealers, right? It presents to us a unique and different challenge.
Yeah, it could compound some of the issues we were talking there. I mean, Mark, do you think, it's a broad question, but I mean, there's a risk that we don't want EVs to drive more drivers out of the industry. So are there things now when you're looking, again, the equipment that you're buying now to look ahead, to prepare things like what Michael said, where we can efficiency, is that in focus already?
We're certainly working with the manufacturers to try and limit weight on the trailers, because the vehicles are heavier for sure, and they remain bigger, whether it's trucks or crossovers or whatever, and then EVs are even higher. So, Mike mentioned it, and I'm grateful for you mentioning it, Mike, that getting the 10% add-on weight from the government to go from 80,000 pounds to 88,000 pounds, that's critical. And that just gets us to it doesn't make us more efficient, it just allows us to keep up, right? So that 8,000 pounds is needed. Otherwise, right, you go up again 20, 30% in SAR, and then you're losing a unit, you're going to have more inefficiency, you're going to have a need for more drivers and more trucks, and that makes it difficult. So the active participation, I would say, from OEMs, and Mike mentioned Ford's involved, I think from all the OEMs, it's super important. We're doing our part with the ACC, and some of the individual companies have lobbyists, and we've done calls on Washington in person and virtual, and we'll continue to that. And I would ask the railroads to collaborate from that way as well. I think that'd be helpful.
So maybe that's the final point, Kevin, from the railroad point of view in terms of preparing for some of these changes. Is it already in focus? I mean, areas like Mark said, supporting those initiatives to make sure the industry doesn't fall further behind, as well as other investments you may be needing to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need the truck capacity to remain abundant to keep destinations fluid. So it's not a competition piece, but more of a collaboration, and it's a partnership to make sure that they can get trucks to dealers so we can continue to bring rail cars in, unload, and keep that cycle going as well. You're running into the same capacity constraints on rail cars. When they get heavier, you can go from a load factor of 10 to 9 or 8. So now you've lost 20% capacity. Where does that come from? Now are you investing in more rail cars? Then you've got to pay off that investment. We talk about that piece of it too. And then also just the infrastructure. KCS has been fortunate enough to participate in one of the first full EV launches from Mexico City to Kansas City. So we're able to get in there early, see some of the challenges with charging capacity and infrastructure opportunities, and have been able to improve that as well ahead of the game. So it's not just physical capacity on the road or the rail, but then at destination to make this as seamless as it possibly can be, even though we know there are challenges abundant from now until 2030 when we see these EV pick up a lot of steam.
Well, it's a good positive message there, and I hope and think that the other railroads and industry will see it similar and not see the increase as a competitive threat, but indeed as a way to keep everyone moving. So I think that's positive, and I think we'll have to end it there. But I think what my takeaway from this is actually you've all talked about quite achievable solutions. I think they shouldn't be topics that it require 20 years of new technology that we haven't invented yet. These are actually things most people in the industry and in the wider sector and government can do now. So we're glad we can share this with this audience. Hope that in the next 2 days there's some other progress together can be made, and look forward to reporting on it further. But thanks very much everyone for your time. Michael Anderson from Ford, Kevin Noah from Kansas City Southern, and Mark Anderson from United Road.